And I thank the Chair, and I at this point yield such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
At the start, I would just like to thank Chairman Ryan and the Budget Committee staff for their hard work with regard to H.R. 3581, the Budget and Accountability Transparency Act. Unless you've been living someplace else than here for the last years, you would not be a surprise to you to hear that this country is broke. However, we should not surprise you that the true extent of our country's debt crisis is a lot worse than anybody in Washington is letting on to. How much worse? Well, that's something that people really don't know. And we won't ever know unless we reform the broken budget process here in D.C. As many have talked about before, our budget process is broken. Simply put, we need to put and make the budget process more transparent and accountable. Fortunately, today we are taking a step in the right direction with this bill. The bill before us today, the Budget and Accounting Transparency Act, is, as they say, a common sense approach to introduce more sunshine and common sense into the budget-making process. So what would the bill do? First of all, specifically the bill recognizes the budgetary impact of the GSEs, Fannie and Freddie, and by bringing them back onto budget and close that black hole that's out there and bring that out of the shadow and into the light. This bill also requires that the federal government apply the very same credit accounting standards as the private sector is doing right now when guaranteeing loans. You know, back in September of 2008, as the country was reeling from the fallout of the financial collapse, the GSEs, Fannie and Freddie, were placed into conservatorship by the FHFA. Under this agreement, FHFA took control of the two companies, and the Treasury Department risked literally hundreds of billions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, to bail them out. To date, the American taxpayer has sunk over $183 billion and counting into those failed institutions. As if this weren't enough, they've added $1.2 trillion in debt and $5.3 trillion in mortgage-backed securities. Now, because Fannie and Freddie have become the explicit financial responsibility of all of us, the federal government, it only makes sense, don't you think, that we treat them the same way that we would treat any other obligation of the federal government, by formally bringing them onto the budget. The CBO even says this. They took this step several years ago by the Office of Management Budget and resisted the change preferred to obscure the total federal exposure of Fannie and Freddie. It's time that the Obama administration does the same thing. So bringing Fannie and Freddie exposes some of the ugly and maybe we call them inconvenient truths, but I know the American people did not send us here to play a shell game, but did send us here to bring out the facts. You know, the combined debt obligation of Fannie and Freddie isn't the only black cloud hanging over us. There's inaccuracies and lack of transparency in budgeting for federal credit programs across the field. You can talk about the cylinder situation that makes the news. You know, that fiasco was an example of a loan guarantee gone sour. Federal loan guarantees are contractual obligations between the taxpayer, the private creditor, and the borrower. In that case, it went south. But unfortunately, under current law, when the government loses or issues a loan guarantee, the inherent risk is not reflected in the loan or loan guaranteeing cost. In fact, the CBO estimates that our current federal obligations under these accounting rules today understate the cost of credit program by some $55 billion a year. And because the rules do not account for market risk, that is why we need to change it. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back I reserve the balance of my time only to say that this does those three important things: provide the clarity, the transparency, and the accountability that we are looking for in these and other aspects of the federal government programs.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves the balance of his time.